said she was just a friend from college. He said it so casually, like the words were harmless, like history can't hold teeth. I wanted to believe him, and for a long time, I did. Until the night I found something in his car, small but undeniable, the kind of truth that doesn't scream, it just quietly splits your life into before and after. That night, the city looked half asleep, fog clinging to the streetlights, cars humming in distant rhythm. I sat in the passenger seat, his jacket draped across my lap, the faint scent of his cologne curling around me. It should have been an ordinary drive home. We'd just left dinner with friends, laughter still hanging faintly in the air. But my fingers brushed something cold and sharp in the seat pocket, and when I pulled it out, the air changed. A single gold hoop, small enough to disappear in my palm, heavy enough to sink my stomach. I turned it over between my fingers, feeling my heartbeat in my throat. "Whose is this?" I asked, voice even, too even. He glanced over, then back at the road. "What is it?" "An earring." He chuckled softly, that practiced, unbothered sound I'd learned to hate. "Probably yours." "It's not." He smiled like a man confident in his own myth. "Then maybe my sister's. She borrowed my car last week." Except his sister hadn't been in town for months, and we both knew it. The rest of the ride unfolded in silence, the kind that hums with unsaid things. The earring sat in my palm the entire time, imprinting a faint ring against my skin. I stared out the window at the blur of passing lights, replaying every moment she'd ever come up in conversation. His college friend, the one he somehow always compared me to. "You'd really like her," he'd said once, smiling over dinner. "She's funny, but in a subtle way. Not like you. You wear your emotions on your sleeve." I remember laughing then, pretending it didn't sting, pretending I didn't notice the softness in his voice when he said her name. Let's say her name was Rachel. It suits the kind of woman men describe with nostalgia. Effortless, understated, the kind of person you can't help but romanticize in hindsight. She came up often in stories, how she helped him study, how she always got his sense of humor, how they'd stayed close even after college. I'd smiled through it, convincing myself I was secure enough not to care. Because that's what good fiancés do, right? Stay calm. Be reasonable. But love makes you rationalize your own unease. It teaches you to mistrust your intuition, to file every doubt under insecurity. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I was shaking, not from anger, but from the quiet clarity of knowing. He turned off the engine, leaned back, and looked at me with that same patronizing calm. "You're quiet," he said. "Don't tell me you're jealous over some random piece of jewelry." I stared at him, then at the earring still gleaming in my hand. "Do you want to try that sentence again?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're overreacting." "It's always the same thing with you. Overreacting." The word hit like a trigger I didn't know I still had. It was the same tone he used when he forgot our anniversary. The same tone he used when I asked why his phone suddenly needed a password. Smooth, controlled, dismissive. I put the earring on the dashboard and opened the car door. The night air hit me, cold, metallic, real. "I'm not overreacting," I said, stepping out. "I'm finally reacting." The door shut behind me with a sound that felt heavier than it should have. I didn't slam it. I didn't need to. As I walked up the path to our building, I realized how strange it felt to hold evidence in your hand. Something small enough to lose, yet powerful enough to make you see your entire life differently. Because that's what betrayal does. It doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it glitters softly in the dark, waiting for you to notice it was there all along. Before that night, I used to laugh about her. Rachel, the college friend, the mythical woman who lived somewhere in the hazy glow of his stories, smart, effortless, different from most girls. He always said it like a compliment, as if I should be grateful to hear about the one who came before me. At first, I played along. I told myself it didn't matter, that every man keeps a few ghosts from his past, and maybe she was just one of his. But ghosts don't text. Ghosts don't call late at night. And ghosts don't leave earrings behind in cars they shouldn't have been in. It hadn't started with the earring. It started with comparison. the slow kind that seeps under your skin before you realize it's poison. "She's just more laid back," he'd say when I got frustrated about work. "You two are so different. She never took things so personally." Or, "Rachel always knew how to talk me down when I got stressed." Or my personal favorite, "You remind me of her sometimes, when you're calm." The first few times, I brushed it off. I told myself he didn't mean anything by it. But soon, it became a pattern, a quiet measuring stick I never asked to be compared against. Every argument, every decision, every emotional moment somehow came back to her. Rachel wouldn't have said that. Rachel would have understood. It's a special kind of loneliness, sitting across from someone you love and realizing he's building a version of you out of someone else's memory. One evening, we were having dinner. Takeout, nothing fancy. I was venting about a client at work, halfway through explaining how I'd fixed an entire project solo, when he interrupted with a small, lazy smile. "You're overthinking again. Rachel always told me to just let things go. You could learn from her." The words hung in the air like smoke. I stared at him, chopsticks frozen midair. "You mean your friend from 10 years ago knows how I should handle my career?" He laughed. "You're taking it the wrong way. You always do." And there it was, the reflexive dismissal that always came after I pushed back. I went quiet, staring at the half-eaten noodles in front of me. He reached for my hand, the same one that had just clenched under the table, and said, "You're nothing like her, you know. That's why I love you." That should have sounded comforting. Instead, it felt like another trap, as if love itself was something I had to earn by not being her. I started noticing things after that. The way he'd light up when her name came up. The way his tone shifted, lighter, warmer, nostalgic. Sometimes I'd catch him smiling at his phone, thumb hovering over the screen, then turning it face down when I walked by. When I asked, he'd grin and say, "Relax, you're acting jealous." I wanted to believe I wasn't. I wanted to believe I was secure enough to let him keep his memories untouched. But love and denial wear the same perfume. You can't tell which one you're breathing until it's too late. One night I asked him, not accusingly, just softly, because softness was the only language he respected, "Do you still talk to her?" He hesitated. It was half a second, but long enough. Then, "Sometimes, just catching up, you know how it is." I nodded, though I didn't. I knew how people stayed in touch, but not how they stayed that in touch. Later, when I went to bed, I lay awake listening to him type quietly beside me. The glow of his phone cast faint blue light across the sheets. He smiled at something he read, his face soft in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. I turned onto my side, facing away from him, and stared into the dark. That was when I realized what comparison does. It doesn't just make you feel smaller. It makes you disappear, 1 inch at a time. You stop laughing as loud. You stop sharing as much. You start curating yourself, sculpting every reaction to sound more like what he wants. Like her. And you wake up one day to find that you've become quiet in your own story. So when I found that earring, it wasn't the discovery that broke me. It was the confirmation, the sudden, brutal understanding that the ghost I'd been competing with wasn't a memory at all. She'd never left. And she'd been sitting in the passenger seat long before I found her proof. When I first met him, he had that quiet confidence people mistake for depth. The kind that makes you lean in closer when he speaks, just to catch every word. His name was Evan, let's call him that. And he was the kind of man who could make ordinary moments feel cinematic. He never raised his voice, never rushed his sentences. Everything he said sounded intentional, like he'd rehearsed it but wanted you to believe he hadn't. We met at a friend's engagement party. Ironic, I guess, given how ours ended. It was one of those warm spring nights when the air smells faintly of champagne and cut flowers, and everyone's a little drunk on optimism. He found me outside on the balcony, leaning against the railing, trying to escape the noise. "Too many happy people in one room?" he asked, smiling. I laughed. "Too much small talk." He handed me a drink and said, "So let's skip it." And just like that, conversation flowed like we'd known each other forever. He told me about his work, about traveling after college, about his friends, and inevitably about her, Rachel. He mentioned her casually, between stories, like a footnote. My best friend from college used to say that, or Rachel and I once got lost in Italy and ended up in a vineyard. At the time, it didn't bother me. Everyone has a Rachel, someone from their past who helped shape them, a friend who lingers in their stories. What struck me wasn't her name. It was the way his voice softened when he said it. I noticed it, tucked it away, and told myself not to overanalyze. By the end of the night, he asked for my number. He didn't play games, didn't wait 3 days to text. He messaged me that same evening. "You looked like you needed saving from that party. Did I succeed?" It was disarming, the way he made attention feel like affection. Within weeks, we were inseparable. We'd spend hours talking in dimly lit cafes, his hand always finding mine mid-conversation like it belonged there. I told myself this was what safety felt like. In the early months, he was all warmth, constant check-ins, thoughtful gestures, the kind of attentiveness that makes you feel chosen. He'd leave little notes on my counter before heading to work, text me just to say he missed my voice. My friends called him perfect boyfriend material. My mother adored him. Even my coworkers, the ones who'd seen me stumble through enough heartbreaks to be skeptical, said he seemed different. And maybe he was. He listened better than anyone I'd ever known, but later I'd realize he was collecting, not listening. Every detail I gave him, every insecurity, every vulnerability, he filed away neatly like ammunition for later. It's a strange thing to be studied under the guise of love. The first mention of Rachel that made me uneasy came about 2 months in. We were at dinner, halfway through a bottle of wine, when I asked him what his college years were like. His eyes lit up. "God, we were wild," he said, smiling. "Rachel and I once," and he launched into another story, the kind told with nostalgia too tender for friendship. When he finished, he looked at me with that easy grin. "You two would have gotten along," he said. I smiled back, pretending not to notice that my chest had tightened. "She sounds great." "She is," he said simply, and went back to his food. It was such an ordinary exchange, but something about it stayed with me, the way his smile lingered after saying her name. The way he never called her a friend, just Rachel, as if that explained everything. After that, she became a quiet background presence in our relationship, invisible, but always there. A name that slipped casually into conversation whenever he needed a benchmark for how people should be. When I got upset after a bad day at work, he'd say, "You're too hard on yourself." Rachel used to remind me to let things go. When I doubted myself, he'd tell me, "You overthink things." Rachel was never like that. I didn't realize it then, but every time he invoked her name, he was sanding away another layer of my confidence. Still, I wanted to be understanding. That was my downfall, my need to rationalize what hurt. I told myself she was part of his story long before me, that her name wasn't competition, just context. One afternoon we were at a bookstore, and I caught him smiling at something on his phone. "Who's that?" I asked playfully. "Rachel," he said. "She sent me a meme. You'd love her humor." I laughed, even though something inside me didn't. By the time he proposed, 2 years later, under fairy lights and nervous laughter, I'd convinced myself she was harmless. I'd buried every pang of discomfort under layers of logic and love. Because that's what you do when you think you found your person. You silence the part of yourself that whispers something's wrong. But the thing about buried truths is they don't die. They wait. And mine was waiting for me, small, golden, and cruelly familiar, in the seat pocket of his car. In the beginning, her presence lived only in stories. Then, slowly, she started to slip into our life. It began innocently enough, a text here, a phone call there. He'd mention her name the way people mention the weather, casually, habitually, without emotion. Rachel just got promoted. Rachel's moving apartments again. Rachel wants my opinion on her new car. Each mention came like a pebble dropped into still water, small on its own, but constant enough to ripple everything around it. At first, I told myself it was fine. I didn't want to be that girl, the insecure one, the jealous one. I wanted to be the fiancé who could laugh about the friend from college and mean it. So I smiled when he showed me her messages, nodded when he took her calls, and even laughed when she sent him memes at midnight. Because that's what trust was supposed to look like, right? Except trust shouldn't feel like swallowing glass. One evening, I came home from work to find him cooking dinner. The table already set, candles lit, wine breathing. "Big night?" I asked, dropping my keys into the bowl by the door. He grinned, stirring pasta sauce. No reason, just wanted to do something nice. It should have felt romantic, but then I saw it. His phone face down beside the cutting board, a faint glow pulsing from underneath it. The pattern of light, 2 quick flashes, 1 long, was the same rhythm it always made when she texted. I didn't ask. Not that night. I couldn't ruin the illusion he was performing for both of us. Over dinner, he told another story about Rachel. This one about how she'd once helped him through a rough time in college, how no one else got him the way she did. He said it with a distant smile, the kind people reserve for memories they don't want to let go of. I smiled back, but inside, something fragile was starting to give way. After that, she was everywhere. She liked his posts within seconds of him uploading them. She sent him playlists to help him focus. She tagged him in inside jokes I didn't understand. When I mentioned it, he brushed it off with that calm tone that always made me question my sanity. "She's my friend, not my secret," he said once, annoyed. "I know," I whispered, but I didn't, not anymore. There was a dinner party at our place, his friends, mine, laughter echoing off the walls. Someone asked how we met, and before I could answer, he jumped in with, "Rachel introduced us, kind of." The room laughed. I didn't. Later that night, I asked what he meant. He smiled. "She didn't literally introduce us, but she's the reason I even showed up to that party. She convinced me to go." "She sounds important," I said. "She is." He said it like he didn't hear himself. The silence that followed was thin and sharp, like a thread stretched too tight. He looked at me then, realizing what he'd said, and reached across the couch to squeeze my hand. "Hey, come on. Don't make it a thing. You know I love you." I smiled, because that's what I was trained to do, to choose reassurance over confrontation, to keep things soft, even when they were cutting. It wasn't until a month later that my suspicion turned into certainty. We were driving to meet his parents for brunch, his playlist filling the car, a mix of mellow indie songs I didn't recognize. One came on, soft piano under a woman's voice, and he smiled faintly. "This one's Rachel's favorite," he said. I stared out the window, hiding the sting behind a laugh. "Of course it is." "She's got good taste," he added. "I bet she does." He didn't notice the edge in my voice, or maybe he did and enjoyed it. He turned up the volume, humming along, while I sat in silence, realizing I knew less about the man beside me than I'd thought. After that, I started noticing the small things, the way he said "we" when talking about her, how his stories about college blurred with stories about now. Once, he mentioned a restaurant she loved, and 2 weeks later, that's where he took me for our date night. When I pointed it out, gently, carefully, he said, "So what if she liked it? Can't I take you somewhere nice without you reading into it?" I learned to stop asking questions, because every time I did, I became the problem. But late at night, when he fell asleep beside me, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, feeling something hollow growing behind my ribs. It wasn't jealousy anymore. It was erasure, like he was slowly replacing my memories with hers, building a collage of her life and calling it ours. And deep down, I think I already knew where it was heading. I just needed proof, something I could hold in my hand, something small but undeniable. I just didn't expect it to be gold. It's strange how quietly betrayal begins, not with shouting, not with slammed doors, but with moments that seem too small to matter, a glance that lasts a beat too long, a hesitation mid-sentence, a name that starts to sound like static every time it's spoken. By the time summer arrived, Rachel had stopped being a story and turned into a presence. Not a person I could see, just something that lived between us, breathing through the pauses in our conversations. I could feel her even when she wasn't mentioned, like humidity before a storm. It started one night in June. We were out with friends, sitting on the patio of a restaurant that smelled like lemon and smoke. He was telling some college story, one of the many that seemed to orbit her. He laughed mid-sentence, his whole face softening. "Rachel would have loved this place," he said, glancing at me like it was a harmless comment. I smiled automatically, but the words stayed lodged in my throat. The laughter around us blurred into background noise. I wanted to ask why she would have loved it, why he still knew what she liked. But I didn't, because asking meant being accused of jealousy again, and I was tired of defending feelings that came from his behavior, not my imagination. That night when we got home, I tried to bring it up gently. "You talk about her a lot," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. He looked up from his phone. "She's my friend. What are you implying?" "Nothing," I said quickly, too quickly. He sighed, dropped his phone on the nightstand, and stood. "You're doing it again, reading into things that aren't there." That phrase, reading into things, was his favorite weapon. It made me sound unstable, emotional, incapable of seeing the world clearly. But this time, it didn't sting the same way. This time, it sounded rehearsed. "Okay," I said quietly, "you're right." He smiled, satisfied. He thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. After that, I started paying attention, not obsessively, just differently. I began noticing the gaps in his stories, the way his phone tilted away when I walked past, the subtle shifts in tone when he talked to coworkers. I didn't want to be the detective in my own relationship, but he left me no choice. The first real slip came one Friday night. He was getting ready to meet some friends from work. I was sitting on the couch, half watching a movie, when his phone lit up on the table beside me. A message preview flashed before disappearing. "Rachel, don't forget the bottle of wine I like." My body went cold. He walked out of the bedroom a second later, adjusting his watch. "You okay?" he asked, seeing the look on my face. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, fine." He hesitated, then leaned down and kissed my forehead. "Don't wait up." Quote, when the door closed, the silence felt deafening. I stared at the dark TV screen, my own reflection flickering back at me, wide-eyed, still, unblinking. I felt like a character in someone else's story, one who didn't realize she'd already been written out. He came home past midnight. His shirt smelled faintly of perfume. Not mine, not familiar. I didn't say anything. I just lay there in bed, eyes open, listening to him slip under the covers like nothing was wrong. His breathing slowed, steady, and false. The next morning he made pancakes. He hummed while he cooked, cheerful, careful. I watched him move around the kitchen like a man completely at ease, and that, somehow, made it worse. "Did you have fun last night?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He smiled without turning around. "Yeah, why?" "Just wondering if Rachel liked the wine." He froze. It was only a fraction of a second, but it was enough. His hand stilled over the pan. "What are you talking about?" I shrugged. "You mentioned she'd be there." "I didn't," he said too quickly. I met his eyes when he finally turned to face me. "No," I said softly, "you didn't." The silence that followed was so thick it felt like gravity. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. I could see the calculation behind his calm, the gears turning as he searched for an explanation that would make me doubt myself again. But I didn't flinch this time. I didn't cry. I just stood there, watching the man I thought I knew rearrange lies behind his eyes. He finally sighed and said, "You're really going to turn this into a fight?" "I'm not turning anything into anything," I said. "You already did." He laughed. Short, sharp, forced. "You need to stop doing this. It's exhausting." Exhausting. Another favorite word. I almost smiled at the familiarity of it. "Then rest," I said, walking out of the kitchen. "You're going to need it." I didn't look back to see his reaction. I didn't have to. I could feel his silence following me down the hallway, heavy and angry. That night, when he left his keys on the counter and his phone charging in the car, something inside me shifted. I walked outside barefoot into the cool summer air, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I might find. Because deep down, I already knew. The truth doesn't hide. It waits, patient, shining, cruel, in the most ordinary places. And I was finally ready to see it. The night I decided to stop pretending was warm and still, the kind of summer night that makes the air feel heavy, like it's holding its breath. Evan had left for another late meeting. The words rolled so easily off his tongue now that they almost sounded believable. He kissed my forehead before he left, his hand resting on my shoulder a little too long, like a stage actor hitting his final cue. When the door shut behind him, the quiet felt like permission. For weeks, I'd lived in that half-life between suspicion and denial, the kind of limbo where you're afraid to confirm what you already know. But something in me had shifted. The need for peace had finally been replaced by the need for proof. I grabbed my keys and headed downstairs. His car was parked where it always was, under the street light that buzzed like an old fluorescent bulb. The metal was still warm from the day's heat. I hesitated for a second, my pulse loud in my ears. Then I opened the door. The first thing that hit me was the smell, faint perfume layered over his cologne, the kind that doesn't come from a store I've ever shopped at. The passenger seat was pushed slightly back, like someone had been sitting there recently. I ran my fingers along the dashboard, the air thick with déjà vu. And that's when I saw it. At first, it was just a glint, something catching the light near the center console. I reached down and picked it up, my hand shaking. A small gold hoop, thin and perfect, the same kind he'd once said didn't suit me. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The world didn't tilt or spin. It just stilled. The sound of my own heartbeat filled the car, steady and sharp. I rolled the earring between my fingers, its smooth surface digging faint crescents into my skin. It wasn't about the jewelry. It was about what it meant. The final confirmation that the ghost he'd built between us had been made of flesh all along. I sat there for a long time, the door still open, the summer air clinging to my skin. People passed by on the sidewalk, laughing, talking, living. I must have looked like a statue, a woman caught mid-realization, her expression unreadable. I didn't cry, not then. The tears would come later, in waves that left salt stains on my pillow. But in that moment, I just stared at the proof in my hand, cold and golden, and felt everything inside me rearrange. I thought about every time he'd said her name, how gently he'd spoken it, how easily he'd made me feel paranoid for noticing. I thought about every moment I'd swallowed my instincts just to keep his love. And I laughed, quietly, bitterly, because it was almost funny how predictable it all was. When I walked back upstairs, I didn't turn on the lights. I just placed the earring on the kitchen counter and stared at it, the way you stare at something venomous from a safe distance. He came home an hour later, humming, his keys jangling. "Hey, babe," he called. "You're up late." I didn't answer. He walked into the kitchen, stopped mid-step when he saw it. His eyes flicked from the earring to me. "What's that?" I tilted my head slightly. "You tell me." He looked at me for a long moment, calculating, assessing. Then he smiled, small and patronizing. "You're really going to do this again?" "Do what?" "Turn nothing into drama." That word again, drama, his favorite way to shrink my feelings into something performative. I almost laughed at the irony. "Whose is it?" I asked, voice calm, measured. He exhaled, feigning patience. "Probably from the car wash, or maybe my sister's. She hasn't been here in months." He shrugged. "Then maybe one of your friends dropped it when you borrowed my car." "I haven't driven it in weeks." The silence that followed was deafening, the kind that makes truth echo. His mask slipped then, just slightly. The faintest flicker of panic before his face reset to neutrality. "You're imagining things," he said, softer this time. "You always do." That was his mistake. Because for the first time, I didn't flinch. I picked up the earring, held it up to the light between us. "This," I said, "isn't imagination." He reached for it, but I pulled my hand back. "You should go," I said. He blinked, surprised. "What?" "Go, wherever you were tonight. I'm sure she's waiting." The room seemed to shrink, the air between us thick with the scent of his cologne and lies. He opened his mouth to say something. A justification, an insult, maybe another denial. But nothing came out. For once, his words failed him. I set the earring back on the counter. "You always said I overreacted," I whispered. "Turns out, I underreacted this whole time." Then I turned away before he could answer. I didn't need to hear the next lie forming on his tongue. In the reflection of the dark window, I could see him standing there, frozen, a man realizing he'd lost control of the story. And me, finally stepping out of it. He didn't leave. Of course he didn't. Men like Evan never leave when you ask them to, not right away. They linger, convinced they can talk their way back into the version of you that still believed them. He stood in the kitchen doorway, one hand pressed to the frame, his expression carefully arranged into remorse. I'd seen that look before. Soft eyes, tense jaw, lips parted just enough to look vulnerable. The look of a man rehearsing an apology he doesn't mean. "Can we please talk about this?" he said. His voice was low, coaxing, like he was trying to soothe a frightened animal. I didn't answer. I was still staring at the earring, glinting on the counter between us. That small, damning thing that had turned my entire world into evidence. He stepped closer. "You're jumping to conclusions." "Am I?" I asked, finally meeting his eyes. "Because I think I've been walking barefoot through your lies for months, and this is the first time I've stopped to look down." His mouth twitched. "You're twisting things again, you always." "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't you dare." The silence that followed was almost cinematic. Heavy, still, charged. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. Inside, the air was full of tension, thick enough to touch. He ran a hand through his hair and laughed once, humorless. "It's not what you think. You're emotional right now, and when you calm down, you'll see how insane this looks." "Insane," I repeated softly, like tasting the word. "You really like that word, don't you? It's your favorite trick. Make me sound crazy so you can keep being believable." He sighed, dropping the act for a second. "You're not listening." "No," I said. "I'm finally hearing." He tried to reach for my hand then, the same hand he used to hold when we crossed the street, the one he'd kissed when he proposed. I pulled back before he could touch me. The gesture was small, but I saw the flash of panic in his eyes. Control. That was the real loss he felt, not love. "Evan," I said, steady now, "I know about her." He froze. His shoulders squared, but his face didn't move. "Know what about her?" "That she's not just your college friend. That you've been seeing her. That she's been in this car, in this house, in our life, while you've been telling me not to. Overthink." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, a whisper. "It's not what you think." I laughed, softly, almost kindly. "It's exactly what I think." He opened his mouth again, then closed it, eyes darting to the counter, to the earring gleaming in the dim light. The calm he wore like armor began to crack. His breathing quickened. His jaw flexed. "So what?" he said suddenly. "You were never easy to be with. You're suffocating. You don't let things go." There it was, the pivot from defense to attack. Classic Evan. When truth cornered him, he made the cage look mutual. I leaned against the counter, letting his words fall uselessly between us. "Say whatever you need to make this feel smaller," I said, "but it doesn't change what you did." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I cut in. "You wanted someone who made you feel like a good man without asking you to be one." He went still. The color drained from his face, just slightly. It wasn't rage, it was recognition, because for the first time, he knew I saw him clearly. "I loved you," he said, the words slow, deliberate. "No," I said, "you loved being adored. There's a difference." The sentence landed harder than I expected. He stared at me like he didn't know whether to argue or beg, but I was done giving him options. I reached for the earring, held it between my thumb and forefinger, and placed it gently in his palm. "You forgot something," I said. He looked down at it, then at me. "That's it? That's everything?" For a moment, I thought he'd drop it. Instead, he closed his fist around it, his knuckles white. "You'll regret this," he whispered, the mask slipping entirely now. "You think you're better than everyone, but you'll end up alone." I smiled faintly. I'd rather be alone than lied to kindly. He stared at me for a few more seconds, waiting, maybe for me to cry, to crumble, to play the role he'd written for me one last time. But I didn't. I just stood there, steady, silent, unmoving. Finally, he walked out. The door slammed behind him, echoing through the apartment like the sound of something final breaking. I didn't chase him. I didn't even move. I just leaned back against the counter, feeling the marble cool beneath my palms, and exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. The room smelled like burnt candle wax and cold air. Outside, thunder rolled, low and slow, as if the universe was applauding quietly. I slid down to the floor, my back against the cabinet, and sat there until the quiet felt safe again. Because the worst part wasn't losing him. It was realizing how long I'd been living in a story where he was the only one allowed to speak. And that silence, the one he used to control me, had finally changed sides. After he left, the apartment didn't feel like mine yet. It felt like a stage after the play ends, props still in place, lights cooling, silence settling in like dust. His glass was still half full on the counter. The faint smell of his cologne clung to the hallway, that familiar, sterile scent that once meant safety and now just smelled like someone I used to know. I stood there for a long time waiting for something. The crash of grief, the flood of anger, maybe the urge to call him back and demand one last confession. But none of it came. Just a strange, quiet calm, the kind that doesn't feel like peace, just the absence of noise. I walked to the window and opened it. The night air rushed in, cool and wet, carrying the smell of rain-soaked pavement. Down below, headlights streaked past in long, ghostly lines. I could see our reflections faintly in the glass, or what was left of them. My face, pale, tired, alive. His absence, thick and invisible beside me. I picked up the earring box I'd set on the counter earlier. It wasn't hers, but mine, the one he'd given me for my birthday last year. I opened it, looked at the small studs inside, and realized I'd stopped wearing them months ago. They were too heavy, he'd said. You don't need jewelry to be beautiful. It sounded sweet then. Now it sounded like a slow theft of identity. I put them on, both of them. The weight felt right, grounding, defiant, like claiming space. The rain started again, tapping softly against the glass. I sat on the couch, knees pulled to my chest, and let it fall in rhythm with the quiet thud of my heartbeat. Every few minutes, my phone lit up on the coffee table. Messages from him, I was sure. I didn't look. I just watched the screen glow and fade, like a dying heartbeat. It's strange how truth can be both devastating and liberating at once. How you can stand in the ruins of something and feel taller. I got up and started collecting his things, not out of rage, but out of necessity. His jacket from the chair, his toothbrush from the bathroom, the book he never finished on the nightstand. Each item felt lighter than it should have. By the time I was done, there was a small pile by the door, and the apartment finally started to breathe again. In the kitchen, I noticed the empty wine glass he'd been holding during our argument. A faint lipstick stain marked the rim, not my shade. For a second, I just stared at it, not angry, not surprised, just done. I rinsed it out, watched the red swirl down the drain, and left it to dry upside down. The storm outside deepened, thunder rolling across the city like slow applause. I lay on the couch, listening to it rumble, and felt my chest rise and fall against the quiet. There was pain, yes, a dull ache where love used to sit, but under it was something steadier, relief. Because for the first time, there was no one to convince, no one to prove, no one to calm down, just me, breathing in a space that finally stopped asking me to shrink. I thought about her, Rachel, the ghost turned real, the woman I'd unknowingly shared my life with. I didn't hate her, Maybe she believed his stories the way I once did. Maybe she thought she was special too. I almost pitied her. When I finally stood to turn off the lights, I caught my reflection again in the dark window. Same apartment, same walls, but a different woman looking back. There was a flicker in her eyes. Not sorrow, not rage, but something stronger. Recognition. Before bed, I wrote a single sentence on a scrap of paper and left it on the counter beside the earring he'd brought into my life like a curse. The truth always glitters. You just have to stop mistaking it for gold. Then I turned off the light, crawled into bed, and let the storm outside finish what I'd started, washing everything clean. For the first time in a long time, the darkness didn't scare me. It finally felt honest. Morning arrived quietly, almost apologetically, as if the world was tiptoeing around my exhaustion. Pale light crept through the curtains, soft and hesitant, landing on the half-empty space beside me where he used to sleep. I stared at it for a while, not with longing, but with the detached curiosity of someone studying an old photograph. The sheets still smelled faintly like him, a mix of cedar and something synthetic, like a memory trying too hard to linger. I sat up slowly, every muscle heavy but steady, and realized I'd slept through the night without dreaming. That hadn't happened in months. The apartment was still. The kind of stillness that used to make me anxious now felt merciful. The air had changed. Lighter, easier to breathe, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. I got up and walked barefoot into the kitchen. The counters were bare except for the note I'd written the night before. The truth always glitters. You just have to stop mistaking it for gold. I ran my finger along the ink, tracing the loops of each word until they felt like mine again. I made coffee, my kind, not his. He always said mine was too strong, too bitter, too much. I poured it into my favorite mug, the chipped one he used to hide in the back of the cabinet, because it looked old. The smell filled the room, sharp and honest. I took a sip, and it burned my tongue just a little. Good. I wanted it to. Outside, the world went on, unbothered. Someone downstairs was walking their dog. A car horn blared. A child laughed. Life didn't pause to pity me, and that, strangely, was comforting. I sat by the window, knees tucked up, and watched the morning unfold. The storm from last night had washed everything clean. The street shimmered in sunlight, puddles glinting like fragments of something once broken but now harmless. I wondered if that's what healing would feel like. Not an instant transformation, but a slow clearing after the wreckage. My phone buzzed on the counter. Once, twice, then silence. I didn't move to check it. I already knew it was him. The predictability of it almost made me smile. I let it vibrate itself into quiet again. Instead, I opened my laptop. For the first time in months, I wanted to write, not to him, not about him, but for myself. I typed without thinking, words spilling out like breath. I thought love was supposed to keep you safe. But maybe real love doesn't protect you from pain. Maybe it teaches you how to stop confusing pain for love. The sentence wasn't perfect, but it felt true. And after months of living in lies, truth, even messy, incomplete truth, felt like oxygen. I spent the rest of the morning cleaning, not out of rage, but out of reclamation. Every sound, the broom against the floor, the clink of dishes, the hum of the vacuum, was proof that the space belonged to me again. I opened every window, let sunlight pour in until the air smelled like dust and wind. By noon, I was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor surrounded by boxes. His boxes. I didn't rush to move them. I just looked at them and realized they no longer hurt to see. They were just objects now, stripped of meaning. I'd already done the real moving, the kind that happens inside you, quietly, decisively. I took a long shower afterward. The water was hot enough to sting, and I let it. I watched the steam rise and blur the mirror, my reflection fading in and out like a ghost I was finally ready to let go of. When I stepped out, I didn't feel fragile anymore, just raw, honest, present. I got dressed, jeans, a loose white shirt, bare face, no performance, no pretense. When I caught my reflection again, I didn't see the woman who'd been lied to. I saw the woman who had finally stopped accepting less than the truth. The doorbell rang once, a sharp, familiar sound that used to make my heart race. Now it didn't. I knew it was him. I didn't answer. Instead, I poured another cup of coffee, sat back by the window, and whispered to myself, "Not today." He could keep knocking. The world outside could keep spinning. But this quiet, this space, this calm, it was mine now. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. He came back 3 days later. I heard his knock before I saw him. 3 slow taps, the same rhythm he always used when he didn't want to seem angry. That sound used to make my pulse quicken. This time, it didn't move me at all. I stayed seated on the couch, coffee cooling in my hand, the clock ticking somewhere behind me. The second knock came, softer, pleading. "Please," he called through the door, "can we just talk?" The voice that used to melt me now sounded like static, familiar but meaningless. I set the mug down, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. There he was, same calm mask, same tidy clothes, eyes rehearsed into regret. I opened the door halfway, not enough for him to step inside, just enough to make it clear that I wasn't hiding. He smiled weakly. "You look tired." "I've been cleaning," I said. "It's amazing how much lighter a place feels when you take the trash out." He blinked, taken aback. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. "We're both upset. I know I made mistakes, but—" "Mistakes?" I repeated. "That's what we're calling lies now?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair, the same gesture he always used before gaslighting me back into silence. "You're angry. I get it, but it wasn't what you think." "I don't care what I think," I said. "I care what happened. And what happened is, you made me question my own instincts until I stopped trusting myself." His expression shifted. Guilt, or maybe annoyance disguised as sorrow. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "That's the problem," I said. "You never mean to. It just happens whenever you need to feel powerful." He swallowed, his composure slipping for a second. "You're being cruel." "No," I said, my voice calm, steady. "I'm just not being kind at my own expense anymore." He stood there, the silence stretching between us like a rope he couldn't stop pulling. "So that's it?" he asked finally. "You're just done?" "I was done the moment I stopped waiting for you to change." He laughed then, short, incredulous, bitter. "You're going to regret this. You think walking away makes you strong, but you'll be alone, and you'll hate it." I smiled faintly. "Maybe. But at least I'll know I'm alone because I chose peace, not because someone else kept taking it from me." For a moment, he didn't move. His eyes softened, searching mine for the version of me who used to bend. But she wasn't there anymore. He looked down, exhaled slowly, and nodded once, like a man acknowledging defeat he couldn't name. "Goodbye, then," he said, voice quiet. "Goodbye," I answered. When the door clicked shut, I leaned my forehead against it for a second, feeling the cool wood under my skin. My body was shaking, but not from fear, from the weight of finality. Closure doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like exhaustion wrapped in relief. I walked back to the window, opened it wide, and let the air rush in. The afternoon sun poured across the floor, catching the small dust particles floating in the light, tiny, aimless, free. The city outside was alive again, children laughing, dogs barking, the faint hum of traffic. I stood there breathing it in, realizing I was part of it again. Not watching life through the fog of someone else's moods, living it. Later, I packed the last of his things into a box. His books, his cologne, the sweater he left on the chair. I taped it shut, wrote nothing on it, no note, no explanation. Just silence, the same silence he once used to control me, now mine to keep. Before bed, I lit a candle and let it burn until the wax spilled over the rim. The room smelled faintly of smoke and honey. I watched the flame steady itself, flickering against the walls. For months, I'd lived afraid of quiet. Now it was all I wanted. I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, and whispered into the still air. You were right about one thing, Evan. Rachel is different. Because she's still living in your story. I finally walked out of it. I blew out the candle. The smoke curled up and disappeared, thin and graceful. And just like that, the room belonged to me again. The days that followed were quiet in a way I hadn't known quiet could be. Not the uneasy kind that used to hang in the air after our arguments. This one was clean, steady, honest. It didn't ask anything of me. It just existed, like a new language I was finally learning to speak. I woke up early again. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to see the light crawl slowly across the walls. I made my coffee the same way every morning. Strong, black, without apology. I'd sit by the window, wrapped in a blanket, and watch the city wake up. People rushing to work, kids tugging at their parents, hands, a man walking his dog across the same street where Evan once picked me up on our first date. For the first time, those memories didn't hurt. They just existed. Uncharged, neutral, like old photographs left too long in the sun. I could look at them without flinching. I could remember without reliving. Healing didn't come as a rush. It came as small, almost invisible moments, cleaning out the last drawer he'd used, laughing at a show we once watched together, realizing I no longer checked my phone every time it buzzed. Each one felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I hadn't even realized I'd given away. I started to notice color again. The plants on the balcony looked greener, the sky bluer, the world less filtered through the lens of his moods. It's incredible how much space you get back when you stop walking on emotional eggshells. My friends had been gentle. They didn't press for details. They just showed up, arms open, voices soft. One evening, we sat outside a cafe, the air cool and golden, and I told them everything. Not in tears, not with anger, just in steady sentences. When I finished, my best friend reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and said, "You sound free." I smiled. I am. Freedom doesn't look the way you imagine it. It's not grand or cinematic. It's eating dinner alone and realizing the silence doesn't ache anymore. It's sleeping diagonally in your own bed. It's laughing without looking around to see if someone disapproves. It's feeling sadness without shame and joy without permission. I didn't date again right away. People kept telling me I'd find someone better, but that wasn't the goal. I didn't need better. I needed me, the version of myself that existed before love became a mirror for someone else's insecurities. Sometimes, when the night gets too quiet, I still think about her, Rachel. Not with anger, not even with pity, just curiosity. I wonder if she ever realized that he wasn't comparing us. He was just recycling the same lies. That's what men like him do. They confuse attention with affection and control with care. And women like us learn, painfully, that love without respect is just patience wearing a disguise. I don't need an apology anymore. Not from him, not from her. The apology I needed was my own. For every time I silenced my instincts, for every time I let someone convince me that softness was a flaw. So I gave it to myself, quietly, without ceremony. One morning I walked to the park near the river, the one we used to visit on Sundays. The air smelled faintly of rain and jasmine. I sat on a bench and watched the sunlight shimmer on the water, each ripple catching a fragment of light before disappearing. That's what healing looked like, brief flashes of beauty where pain used to live. And sitting there, I understood something simple, something I'd spent months trying to name. He didn't break me. He just showed me the parts of myself I'd been too afraid to protect. When I went home, I wrote a single line on a sticky note and placed it on my mirror. Comparison is the enemy of peace, and I refuse to live like a contestant ever again. Now, every morning, it's the first thing I see. And the reflection that stares back at me finally looks like someone who believes it. By autumn, the story had stopped replaying itself in my mind. I didn't wake up thinking of him or her or the way my stomach used to twist when my phone lit up with his name. I'd stopped rehearsing the confrontation, stopped wondering if there was anything I could have said differently. Some endings don't need revisions. They just need distance. I started to love ordinary days again. Mornings with slow sunlight and cheap coffee. Long walks with no destination. Grocery lists scribbled on napkins. I began filling the silence with music again. Not the songs we used to share, but new ones. Ones that belonged only to me. Sometimes I'd dance barefoot in the kitchen, clumsy and ungraceful, just to prove I still could. There were still echoes. Little reminders that grief doesn't vanish. It just softens. His shirt that I found behind the laundry basket. A message from an unknown number that I didn't open but somehow knew was him. The memory of his laugh, appearing uninvited in moments too peaceful to deserve it. But those ghosts didn't haunt me anymore. They passed through, quiet and harmless, like strangers in a dream. One evening I went to the waterfront after work. The sky was heavy with gold, the kind of light that makes everything look softer than it is. I stood by the railing, the wind catching my hair, and watched the water move. Endless, patient, reflecting the city lights. I thought about how small everything looked from there, how temporary even the worst heartbreak feels when you're standing still long enough to see it fade. And for the first time, I felt gratitude. Not for him, never for him, but for the lesson hidden inside the wreckage, for the woman I'd become because of it. The one who listens to her intuition now, who doesn't apologize for her emotions, who knows the difference between attention and care. Love didn't scare me anymore. It just had to earn its place this time. People love to say time heals everything, but I don't think that's true. Time doesn't heal. It just gives you space to see the wound for what it was. Healing comes when you finally stop reopening it. I started volunteering on weekends, helping a women's support group downtown. At first, I didn't talk much. I just listened. So many of their stories sounded like echoes of mine. The same soft control, the same quiet gaslighting, the same disbelief when the proof finally appeared. And I realized how universal heartbreak really is. Not because men don't change, but because women keep forgiving the wrong kind of love. Sometimes, after the meetings, one of them would ask, "How did you know it was over?" And I'd smile and say, when I realized peace was quieter than his apology. It always made them go silent for a moment. Then they'd nod, like they knew exactly what I meant. Back home, I'd light a candle, not for him, but for closure, and write small notes to myself on scraps of paper. You didn't lose anything real. You only lost the illusion. You were never too much. He was too little. They started covering my fridge like small constellations, reminders glowing in the kitchen light. And maybe that's what survival looks like. Not a triumphant ending, but the quiet decision to stay open, to feel again, to love again, someday, without fear. Because the truth is, heartbreak doesn't ruin you, it reveals you. It shows you where the cracks were, where you bent too far, where you need to build differently next time. So yes, he compared me to his college friend. He made me feel replaceable, small, unseen. But he also gave me something he never intended to: clarity. And now, every time I look in the mirror, I see the woman who found her own reflection again, not in his eyes, but in her own resilience. So if you're listening to this, wondering if your gut is right, if your instincts are trying to save you, trust them. The truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just waits quietly for you to finally look. Has this ever happened to you? Share your story in the comments.